be sure to take notes, get your questions ready. This time is for you to ask Bob, ask Tom, ask the rest of the community that's attending today to help get the answers you need to help move forward. So with that, let's kick it over to Tom. Tom, welcome to the program today.
Hey, happy to be here.
Now, Tom, you've been looking at Filecoin for quite some time. And, really, I just wanted to give people a sense for your journey. And when I think about anyone's journey within entering the ecosystem, it comes down to that point where Filecoin first caught your attention. What happened? What was that moment for you?
Well, one of the things that really struck me with Filecoin is back almost a year ago, I started just trying to come up to speed in crypto. I hadn't really spent much time there. I mean, my background is in data center automation, application automation, and I wanted to just kind of figure out what was going on. And I want to be hesitant saying this, but a lot of the crypto platforms that I looked at didn't seem very. They didn't seem economically viable in a way that really struck me until I found Filecoin. Because the big benefit with Filecoin is that it was very viable to get customers and interest from outside of crypto. And this also harkens back in a big way to the opening of really the internet age. We go back and we look at the dot-com bubble bursting. A significant problem that a lot of those guys had was that they were just selling to each other. And it was a very closed ecosystem. To really scale an economy, you've got to be able to get outside of yourself. And Filecoin does that, right? By being able to supply not only Web3 technologies, but also have very real solutions for problems that exist for a lot of companies and organizations today. And so that was the first thing that got me looking at it. And the other thing was that I'm an infrastructure guy. This is what I do. And it fell into my wheelhouse.
What was the moment where you decided to start building? Can you bring me back to that moment in time?
I mean, it was kind of funny because I didn't realize what I was getting into. And this is something I tell a lot of entrepreneurs is it's a good thing you don't know what you're getting into, because then you probably wouldn't do it. I was looking at it and thinking, I bet I can get into this after spending about 20 grand. And that number was too low. But the moment really was when I started to look at how much money could be made with Filecoin and running some initial numbers and saying, hey, this is worth it to give it a shot, at least start to investigate. And at the same time, I hadn't built servers for a number of years and had just started to realize that it's something I really like to do. And so it was something where I said, worst case scenario, I'll walk away from this and I'll have learned a lot and had a good time.
You mentioned a couple of things already about from building servers to the fact that you're an infrastructure guy. How does, when you look at Filecoin, how does it connect to your professional identity and your passions? This represents a new path forward, but, what connection did Filecoin make to you personally about what you wanted your career to look like?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. And so I recently actually sold a company to VMware a couple of years ago. And, I'm constantly thinking about what the next venture is going to be. And the thing about Filecoin is that there are a lot of different opportunities that we can put on top of this platform. And a lot of different ways to go to market and make money and present a product which should be very, very lucrative and very viable. One of the big challenges I ran into, because I owned a company, I started a company called SaltStack. And one of the big challenges that we ran into as an open source company was just how many people loved to make money with our stuff, and we never saw anything from it. And so it was really interesting to come back and realize that I could build something in a next generation ecosystem that made a lot of sense, that could be very profitable, and that still followed a lot of the ideals that I believed in.
So let's go back to, like, we've been inching into your story, looking at like this experimentation column. Like, this is, I took these notes from when you first told me about your story, about what you did starting out. Tell me a little bit more about what you did specifically to get started with with building up your system.
Well, I got a couple of chassis off of eBay and just put motherboards in them, some super micro motherboards. But it's funny in retrospect, like I feel like I bought all the wrong hardware. And got enough of it up that I could just play around with it. And I mean, I started looking into Filecoin and researching it back in May. I didn't really have anything up and running in a way that's remotely real until around August. And I had 3 servers that looked kind of like these guys, just sitting in my basement, and just beginning to figure out how sealing works and all that stuff. One of the big challenges that I ran into was that the sealing system just never behaved the way that I expected it to. And so along every step, I just had to, I mean, I was tearing apart hardware every day almost to say, okay, here's a different design, here's a different model, so we can see if this is going to work better. And until I could get it to the point where it was operating fairly smoothly. One of the best things that happened was going to ESPA, because I deployed in a data center in mid to late October, and was able to really just start to get things kind of moving. But I'd also spent a lot of time focusing on how do I automate the setup? How do I make it so that it's really easy to bring on board new sealing equipment and new miners and things like that? Because in my mind, the things that slow you down have more to do with dealing with the technical scale than just onboarding data. And so, yeah, I mean, those first really 4 or 5 months were all about learning, figuring out how to automate, figuring out what my hardware stack options look like. Yeah, so that I can start actually getting down to business.
So, it sounds like sealing was a big blocker for you in those early months. What would you describe as was the mistake you made there?
Oh, I made a lot of mistakes. Uh,
Let's talk about them. I love mistakes.
so, I mean, I didn't understand really. I mean, it's funny, you go back and look at the documentation, right? And there's some charts in there that say, yeah, this process will take this many resources. But I didn't understand how the scheduler would work. The sealing scheduler is, let's say, it could be a little challenging to work with. Balancing between these different processes was difficult because I didn't quite understand where the bottlenecks were going to be, right? Were they going to be CPU bottlenecks, RAM bottlenecks? How much performance am I actually going to be getting out of these video cards? How can I make sure that the video cards are fully utilized? Because I mean, I ended up, at first setting up systems with just 2 video cards, and then I put 4 video cards in, and I'm going, I expected I'd be able to do more, but I put more on, and it just loads more jobs onto the first video card, never touches the latter ones. And so then building some automation around being able to really easily start up processes and workers that are tied back to more video cards inside of an array, going back and rethinking how my mixtures work, because at first I was looking at it, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'll get some CSC, I think CSC 846s, some 36 bay super micro servers, and do a mix of PC1, PC2, and storage on one box. And then I realized after a little while that probably wouldn't be a good idea. And then I went back to that, and it was just this question of how do I blend everything?
So much of this, as you describe it, sounds like you were locked in a room by yourself with some docs. Uh, what resources were you using? And as you look back on it, how would you instruct others to like what resources should they focus on? What was the most helpful? And then maybe the follow-on question is, what happened, or like what did you get exposed to that really brought your operation to the next level?
So starting out with almost any piece of open source software. I mean, I've been in open source for over 20 years now. And starting out with almost any piece of open source software, there is a certain level of being locked in a room with the docs. And it's one of these kind of truths that I think that we neglect as open source developers, because we end up going back and thinking, oh, we've got these programs and we've got ESPA, right? And we've got this great, community on Slack, and those exist, and you can go and you can ask questions. But one of the things that's fascinated me so much is just how much of an open source community either is silent or how hard it can be to get those answers. And then when you're diving into something, there are layers of commitment that you go through, right? I wasn't ready right off the bat to go to the first ESPA, right? I started building hardware and it didn't occur to me, oh, I should sign up for ESPA, right? I mean, my reaction was, well, I guess I'll just figure this out. And I don't know how committed I am yet. Anyway, sure, I put money into it, but it was still along the lines of saying, is this really something I want to dive into? I don't think I was really committed until late October, early November, when I deployed to a data center. Only then did I kind of realize that, yeah, everything's gone wrong. Frankly, this has been a very difficult journey. And when I go online and ask questions, fantastic help, wonderful community. But I was surprised how hard it was for people to answer some of the questions I had and to solve some of the problems I was running into, because there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong.
Right. You know, you were looking at this journey, and we got 15 months of your life on the screen here. And really, the big question comes down to conviction. When did you find conviction?
Well, I just kind of wake up with an overabundance of conviction. It's a problem I have. Now, there were a lot of times where I look at things and say, why am I doing this? This costs a lot of money. It's taking way more time than I thought originally. And I would go back and review my numbers and say, no, this is profitable. This is the most fun I've had dealing with tech in years. And so, there were plenty of days where I would just say, look, I'm not looking at this for 2 days or a week, because I'm exhausted. And then just coming back around to it. The other thing that helped the most was bringing on a partner, and bringing on Alex again in late October, and having somebody else who kind of believes in what's happening, instead of, like you said, being locked alone in a room. Having somebody else to work with, that goes a long way.
Now, you referenced ESPA a couple times as part of your story and journey. What did that mean to you, and like as you do a retrospective on your participation there?
The thing that was great about ESPA is that I get to ESPA and start talking to Joe, and I'd been there for 20 minutes, and I'm going, well, this was worth it. So many questions were answered because, again, one of these challenges that you run into is that it can be difficult to just get in a room with somebody who can just walk you through things and say, "Oh yeah, you don't need to figure out X, Y, Z. I'll just tell you." Whereas it's so different than just asking these questions in chat. I ask them in chat, and I get kind of half answers because the other side doesn't understand, right? You need to sit down and talk to somebody. And then being able to do that was, again, just so ridiculously helpful. Um, and I mean, I'll divert a little bit and answer a couple of questions in here. So, I mean, one person was like, how has the low fill price affect your operations today? It's fine. I mean, because I'm only doing fill plus, and the fill price is still well within a range if we're doing fill plus, at least for the short term, that it can be very profitable. Ironically, when I started, the price was up around $18, and I ran all my initial numbers that way. But then when I ran those numbers, I projected what would things look like at $3 to make sure that I was building towards an extremely low potential target. Because there's always the chance, I mean, given the level of volatility. So I'd say that if you're going to go into business and invest, you've got to be really careful about how that works. You need to take a really strong look at what your real costs are. You got to be honest with yourself all the way through. And ESPA, the Enterprise Storage Provider Accelerator, was absolutely fantastic. So is it, what is it, once a quarter?
We do one cohort a quarter. We have room for 22 organizations to participate. And we posted a link in the chat if you're interested. But this is our marquee accelerator program for getting you up to speed and ingrained within the community. As Tom can hopefully illustrate, you can be really smart technically, but there are certain questions that are just harder to get answered. And this is like our premier event to just remove those blockers for you. Not only you get a better sense for the technology and what it takes from a business side, you get to meet the protocol labs and Filecoin Foundation people. We have tons of people from across the entire ecosystem showing up as presenters. We have analysts, investors there. We have hardware providers there. We're trying to make this like a one-stop shop for getting you ingrained within the community. And I think, it is designed with the purpose of conviction. We know that, just like Tom said, everyone's trying to figure this out. They don't know if this is really what they're looking for. They have a sense and they're optimistic. But most people come out of ESPA saying, yes, I get it, I see it, and I'm going to move forward on a roadmap. And that's what we're designed to do this for the storage provider community. And it's typically something that most storage providers do at some point within their first year. Some do it, they want to do get through the experimentation stage, maybe even the form of business stage before they do it. Some people like to do it right as they're beginning their experimentation stage. There's no right way, but it's good for you all to be aware of it, because eventually it is the path to ingratiating yourself to the community, letting them know your intentions, and really taking your game to the next level. And we all have future sessions on ESPA specifically, so you'll have to come back for those later on. So, Tom, I like I like how you said you hadn't had more fun with technology in a long time working on Filecoin. We talked about infrastructure. We talked about setting up servers. What else is on that list that we haven't mentioned?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is being part of a community, and I guess too. How do I put this? So I started an open source project that's very, very successful, called Salt. And for those of you who don't know what Salt is, it is an infrastructure automation system, which obviously I would strongly recommend looking into. Uh, and we just, let's see, OpenLogic just came out with a report that says 22% of all companies use Salt. So it is one of the largest open source communities really that are out there in infrastructure automation. And building open source software is brutal. In many regards, for a lot of open source developers, especially those who start and build these communities, it is an incredible burden. And at first, it's so much fun because all of a sudden you've got a lot of people talking to you, you've got a lot of people working with you, and they're really excited about your technology. But then you end up with the darker side of open source, right? Where it's hard to get money. You put so much energy and effort into things, but people for some strange reason hate you for it. And the last few years of working with Salt just became a lot more difficult. And as the company got bigger, I'm just less of a big company guy, right? And being able to come back to the roots of saying, I'm gonna work on a startup again. I'm gonna work on just building a company from scratch. That's what I love to do, right? That's where I live. That's where I breathe. And so again, that's really where it comes back to being fun. And then getting back to my roots of being an infrastructure and a data center guy, coming up to speed on some of the new hardware technology, just because I've been out of the mix for a few years. That was just so much. It's just been a lot of fun.
Hey, Tom, where are you now and where are you going?
So right now, we've had, it's funny, we've had a bunch of setbacks. I've had so many flipping setbacks. It's ridiculous. But where we're at right now is we've got just under 2 petabytes in power on the network. We've got storage capability right now to take that up to about 50.
50 what?
50 petabytes.
Yep.
And so where we're at is kind of this mixture of doing our own sealing, working with some sealing outsourcers like Line. We're just starting to work with those guys. They've been great. Bringing in some of our own data. We've got some big contracts that we're working through right now that are in the order of between 10 to 20 petabytes. We've got let's see, and we've got some data still that we've bought, that we've put online, and some that we've sourced ourselves. And so where we're at right now is really the tech works, the servers and the sealing work great. I've got a really good growth plan from a hardware perspective that I think is much more cost effective than a lot of what we've seen. So I'm really excited about that. And building it out from a business perspective, how to look at this from the perspective not just of saying, oh, I'm mining Filecoin, but how do I make a storage business? How do I make a storage business that can legitimately compete against guys like AWS Glacier? And because the demand out there is ridiculous. I've been amazed talking to a few potential customers at just how incredibly excited they are to get out of a lot of these big cloud vendors and move to decentralized storage. So that's really the exciting part. We've just started to pitch investors. We've just started to work with a number of different fundraising opportunities, and also to see the incredible levels of excitement when we pitch those investors about coming on board. And doing it right, because ironically, right, we're just starting to pitch, so we're telling people, not yet. We're going out and we're cultivating as much interest as we can before we can come through with a really strong structured round.
Final question, then we'll turn it over to some Q&A, Tom. If you could leave our audience with one piece of advice, either as a new SP or a potential entrant to becoming a storage provider, what would it be?
One piece of advice, I'd say go to ESPA. And I'm not just saying that because that's what Porter wants to hear.
That's actually not, I mean, this is open forum. You tell me.
Yeah,
This
no,
is
I would say go to ESPA. That was hugely helpful. Yeah, because a lot of this stuff is tricky. It's hard to figure out. And before you go to ESPA, know as much as you can. You'll get more out of it because you can ask the right questions. But yeah, get hooked into the people who are willing and excited to help you move forward.
All right, Tom, before we kick it over to Q&A, you can start reading through the chat if you will. We'll get to that in a second, but Bob.
I collected actually from the chat and the Q&A some questions for Tom, so maybe we can go over that. Or you have separate question for me, Porter.
Well, I'm very curious on your take before we, on Tom's comments before we kick it over to Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, Tom covers it all in the sense that he clearly says he wants to build out a business, a storage business. It's not about mining. So Filecoin is about storing humanity's most important information on the Web3 decentralized storage layer, and building storage businesses on top of that is really what we want to encourage and what we want to see growing in our ecosystem. So that's great. I echo that it takes a lot of experimentation and a lot of getting your hands dirty to get the stuff to know inside out. The stuff does break, and you need to be able to repair from that. You better know that before you go on main net, before you go on chain, where it does cost you money if you mess up your infrastructure. So that's definitely a very good point.
So Bob, you want to run Tom through some of the questions?
Yeah, well, so Tom, first question. People want to reach out to you on Slack. Can you share your Slack handle in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
If you have time for Slack, because you're a very busy man.
And one of the things that I'll say is I'm more than happy to talk to folks on Slack. I might be a little slow in responding, just because I've got a lot going on. Oh, whoops, I was hosting panelists.
Okay. Okay. So,
but yeah, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on Slack.
cool. So one question I have, so as a Protocol Labs employee, trying to help more people like you doing stuff like you do, what would have been content that would have helped you in the early stages of your setup of your experimentation? What were you missing that you were, if you're looking back now, if I had that would have helped me a lot?
I think that where I lost most of my time was kind of around hardware expectations. And understanding in a deeper sense how everything was going to behave. And I'm looking at some larger scale reference architectures, because I didn't really understand things like why you would want to use a window post worker, why you want a winning post worker, why you need a lot of wallet addresses, right? And setting up actor addresses. And so the docs are really good in that they cover technically how things work. But one of the big problems that we run into with open source documentation in general is the fact that we as open source developers think about things in a very reference kind of way, right? I just need to put the data out there. Whereas people learn through experiencing a journey, and walking someone through that journey makes a lot more sense. To come back and say, hey, you can get to a tib a day on one system with just a minor maybe if it looks like this and this is what's happening. Yeah. Which is very different from saying if you want to get to 10 tibs ceiling a day, these are the things that you need to consider. This is what your network throughput needs to look like. Here are, here are kind of more reference architectures on how to put this thing together. Instead, what I ended up doing is going back and looking at a bunch of YouTube videos, watching them, learning a lot, trying to build somebody else's reference architecture, and then saying, that's not what I want.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Someone asks about electricity consumption, or if that's a top expense on in the total picture, or is that a modest expense compared to other crypto mining, or compared to whatever?
One of the things that's been great about Filecoin is I go to a data center and I say, yeah, I'm doing Filecoin mining, and they go, ah, we don't want miners,
Hmm.
right? And I say, no. I'm putting, into one rack, I'm putting 30 amps and a 208 and 208 volts, right? Which is, I would say, very reasonable power expectations. Once I tell a data center that, they're fine, right? They don't have any concerns anymore. And similarly, I mean, you can pack it a little more dense than that, but the power hasn't been the big bottleneck. And again, because it's not proof of work, it's proof of storage, right? What's expensive power wise is onboarding, and so you get to you get to look at it very, very differently. So yeah, power is not the primary expense. The primary expense is the primary expense is collateral, is Filecoin, it's a stake. And the nice thing about that is you buy and you don't lose it. And then the secondary expense is hardware, just so many hard drives. My hallway right next to me has about 150 18 terabyte hard drives in it right now. So yeah, so many hard drives.
So one of the interesting questions was like, okay, so you started as a technical person and then went out to reach out to your business partner to do this together. What if you're in the opposite situation, that you're a non-technical person and you want to start in Filecoin? How you approach that?
I'm going to give an answer that a lot of people don't like to hear, and that is, and I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs over the years, because again, right, I've successfully exited companies, and I sit down with them and I just say, look, if you're a non-technical guy, either become a technical guy or convince a tech guy to work with you, because you've got to make product, right? You have to create product, and if you cannot create product, and I'm sorry, but if you think that you can just, I'm going to get in trouble. If you think that you can just MBA your way through this, you can't. You have to make product.
There are partners in the ecosystem that make it hands off for investors, but still, if you don't know what you're doing and you're putting so much fill at stake, because that's your primary expense, as you said, if you're putting all that at stake and you lose it because you do something stupid, that's going to be a painful thing. So, yeah.
Oh, incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love Filecoin, but this is not for the faint of heart. This is more complicated than mining other currencies. And if you're not technical, and also the realization that this ecosystem isn't about throwing together a mining rig under your desk. This is about figuring out how to build a business around delivering storage. If you want something sustainable here, you got to build product. And so if you can't build product, then you might be barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah. So, and if you write on your slide, the last point is capital raise. You're not going out and raise capital for Filecoin mining or Filecoin business. You're going out for capital raise on a product that you're building around it, right?
That's how I'm doing it. Yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different ways to raise money around Filecoin. And so you begin to ask some of these questions. Do I want to be like I'm pushing? It's all about being a product business. But you can make good money by being a storage provider that is just taking on replicas. And the best way to raise money is to first prove that you can do it. Right. I mentioned earlier that I haven't gone out and raised money aggressively yet. Now, granted, I brought a lot of my own money to bear to begin. But when you go out and you raise money, it's so much easier to say, this works now. These are the returns. All I need is to put gas on this fire. And that's what everybody from an investor perspective wants to hear. They want to look at something that you have and say, if I put money there, I'm going to get money back. And what is the relative risk that they're willing to take? Right now, from an investor perspective, the risk willingness is not as high as it was a few years ago because of the current state of the economy. Meaning it makes more sense to come back and say, this is how we're making money. When I'm sitting down with an investor and saying, hey, look, we're just starting out, sure, but this is the projection as to where things look like. What I'm able to convey is it's a crypto winter and we can make good money with this. So just imagine what's going to happen when this crypto winter ends. And they get excited. But again, they get excited because I can say, this is what we're doing today. This is really how it works. This is really where we're at. And then layer a product business on top of it. And that again comes back in, do you want to look for people who just want to invest in a crypto miner? And that they say, I just want to see some return on my money. I just want to say, lend Filecoin to somebody so that they can get accelerant, or you're looking for somebody who wants to build some sort of unique business. And those pitches become very, very, very different. And so that development of what your product is your product being a storage provider and it's trying to be as simple and lean as possible? Is your product trying to create some next generation storage solution? Is your product inside the file system ecosystem, or is it bold enough to branch out? Those sorts of things all need to be answered from an investor perspective.
Yeah, cool.
Well,
Porter,
we got
may I
time for
have
one more question.
one more? Okay. Actually, Nelson just put one in the chat that is also close to my heart because you and I, Tom, we both have a open source background, and looking at the open source ecosystems that we are in with Filecoin, with your
value that is presented to open source comes from. And there's this concept, I keep meaning to, I've written half of a book on it and I should finish. But there's a concept that I call the Trinity of open source. And that idea is to say that there's certain things that open source development and community does really well. And you need to focus on just that. Too many open source communities try and branch out to places that they shouldn't. And then you've got things that go really well from a productization and a commercial perspective. And the trick is to find open source software and to write open source software that can bolster your proprietary goals and your business goals towards a unified strategy. And so this concept that I have called the Trinity of open source is, and you can look up, I might put this in Slack, but I've got some presentations on talking about this because it's all about having those 3 points: your strategy, the commercial objectives, and the open source objectives. Understanding that open source builds platforms, generic usable platforms that can be utilized in many ways. Corporate customers need solutions. they aren't savvy enough to use the complexities of the open source platform. And that you need to combine those to get enough momentum to win, to have strategic wins today. Because it's harder to get strategic technology wins today than I would say that it was 20 plus years ago.
That
Because
is
of
a
how much
big
bigger the
call.
ecosystem
That
is.
yeah, that is a big call to action to all of us on this call here. So use the open source Filecoin platform to build a solution that enterprises can use, because they are looking for the solutions. They're not interested in storing the Filecoin per se.
Yeah.
I think that's a great note to go out on. Tom, thank you so much for your time. If you have questions for him directly, you have his Slack handle. He'll get back to you eventually. For those of you new to the community, the best way to keep in touch is on Twitter at Filecoin SP. And be sure to join the Filecoin Slack, where the primary channel is the global storage provider community. We're always posting opportunities, resources. We'll answer your questions, get you connected to the ecosystem. No better way to get connected than through our Filecoin Slack.